Debt is a 4-letter word. Is that a coincidence or actually a consequence of how bad the average American is? Today, we're going to talk about each age group and how they should handle their money. 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. We got it all covered today.
It's Brian Preston, the Money Guy.
So I'm actually really excited about this, Brian, because again, one of the things that we try to do is we try to make this show customized for you, for the audience, to make sure it's as valuable as it can be. And one of the things that we've heard from you guys is, man, I love it when you guys walk through the decades. I love it when you talk about net worth through decade, or by age, what are some of the financial things you ought to be thinking about? And we said, okay, well, if that's something that you guys like, that you find value in, let's talk about something that gets a lot of airtime, but doesn't always get the Money Guy airtime. And so we said, let's talk about what we think debt should look like at each age and stage of life.
I want to tell you guys, this isn't in the show notes, but it's something that I've noticed from a career of doing financial planning and helping successful people manage their money, is that if the typical client of a financial planner, a high net worth individual, we actually deal with a lot less debt issues than you'd imagine, because I have found that people who are good with money and successful typically don't have a lot of debt issues. So if you're one of these people, if your boat is leaking because of all the debt and the cash flow and the monthly payments, this is something you've got to get under control as soon as possible so you can get on that path of being one of those successful people and those behaviors that I talk about that we work with clients. Because it is troubling if you see so much of America is struggling with debt, and then you find out that a lot of successful people all through their lives didn't have those struggles because they were very disciplined, very responsible. It's kind of a wake-up call, and that's what I want this to be. Because I don't think debt is inherently bad. I just think it's a tool that most of us don't respect. I mean, there's two things. My dad always, he used to ride motorcycles until he had children, and then he quit. And I was always fascinated about that. And I asked Dad, tell me about why you quit riding motorcycles. And he said, look, anybody who rides motorcycles, if you're not scared, you're not doing it right. And it's the same thing with knives. Knives can be tremendously valuable tools, but if you're not handling it carefully and not respecting the sharpness of the blade, you can get in a lot of danger really quickly.
So that's something that's interesting that you say that, Brian, because a lot of times when a brand new client comes and works with us, one of the things we always want to start with when they start talking to us and they ask about like investments, and we always want to kind of lay out our investment philosophy. Hey, this is how we think about investing. This is how we think about looking at money. I think it's important, and you kind of alluded to it there, our philosophy on debt is maybe a little bit different than some other voices out there in the financial world on debt. I think that
we have both ways. I mean, because there's some guys that want you to carry debt your entire life because they think that the exponential compounding interest growth of your investments outweighs the carry costs of the interest. But then you've got others, including one of our neighbors that we think a lot of, who's get out of debt as soon as possible. So where's the balance in that? And my thought is, debt is one of those useful tools that you should be scared of. But I think here in America, unfortunately, we've commoditized something that should be cautious, meaning it should be kept behind glass, only used for very special circumstances and very special things that are hopefully beneficial to long-term growth. Because that's where leverage can be healthy.
That's right.
But we've somehow, in America...
We've bastardized it a little bit.
We have. We've turned it into a negative thing where even our children are exposed to it, and we have turned something that should be handled with caution into something that's just part of everyday's life. We think that's normal. That's a desensitizing to the strength and the concern that you should have about debt that I do not think is healthy. And I have some stats. By the way, I did a little research. There was an article by CNBC that, if you want proof, only 23% of Americans have no debt. So that means the lion's share, 77% of the people
have some sort of debt.
Carry some type of debt. 20% of Americans spend 50 to 100% of their monthly income on debt repayment.
Now that one, I got to be honest, was a little shocking to me. I can get that, okay, 77% of folks have some sort of debt. But hearing that 1 out of 5 people, because that's 20%, 1 out of 5,
50 to 100% of their incoming money.
half to all of their money goes to debt service.
When debt, really, if you look at all debt service, I think conservatively, you shouldn't let it exceed 35%. And that's even, to me, that's even too high.
Sure.
But I mean, when you compare that to somebody who's 50 to 100%, that's not living your best life.
That's right.
And that, if you want to know what causes divorce, what causes midlife crisis, what causes stress, get a lifestyle where 50 to 100% of your monthly cash flow is going to service debt. It is a recipe for disaster. And then the last thing, I thought this was interesting from the CNBC article before we kind of jumped into these different age groups. You ask, where is this money coming from? I mean, where is the spending?
Where's it going to, right?
We hear the average personal debt is $38,000 for Americans. $38,000. That's not including mortgages. So that's just personal debt. That's credit cards, auto loans, and then like student loans.
And didn't we say like a few weeks ago, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average income, and I think this was the average income, was somewhere around like $40,000. Isn't that right? The average income in the
country. We
country?
can do a quick search, but yeah, it's lower than you'd anticipate.
And so think about what that means. If the average American has $38,000 in debt and the average income is $40,000, that means the average person has an entire year of their earnings in debt.
It's scary. And that's what the last stat I had on this was, according to this study, 15% of that debt is coming from dining and nightlife, 13% is coming from clothing and personal care, and then 13% is personal passions and hobbies. We basically have nothing to show for a lot of this debt that's building up in the United States. So we obviously have a very dysfunctional relationship with this monster we like to call debt.
Yep.
So let's kind of talk about how do we handle this when you're younger, when you're in your 20s, when you're in your 30s, your 40s, because each one of these periods of your life, you're going to have different things that are occurring. You think about when you're in your 20s, you're probably thinking student loans, and because you're getting out there, you maybe have a credit card debt or your first auto loan. When you get into your 30s, you might even add a mortgage.
Yep.
So we're going to kind of cover all those things, and I want to even give you some rules of how you proceed so that you come out of this thing better for it.
Perfect.
So let's kind of jump in. Let's first talk about the 20s. Bo, unfortunately, nobody at this table is still in their 20s.
That is correct.
So, but here's the good thing. Even though nobody at this table is in their 20s, that age has given us what we like to call wisdom,
right,
from experience.
I appreciate
that.
that.
So we can hopefully fast forward and think about or look back, not fast forward, but look back and think about our 20s. Because this is not Benjamin Button, so you can't fast forward to get younger. But you think about this as, how does this work? And I always tell, for 20-year-olds, why remove the rocket fuel from your financial boosters with debt? And that's really, and I don't use the word rocket fuel I don't mean it as a joke. I don't mean it as to. It's
actually quite literal.
And because here's the thing, I want you to hear me. If anything else, if you have a family member or you yourself are in your 20s, I want you to know this, because this is what changed my life when I heard this when I was like 17, 18 years old, close to 20 years of age. Anybody out there in your 20s can be wealthy. You don't have to come from money. Don't listen to what the news media tells you. I'm going to give you the stats. Anybody under 30 years of age, all you have to do is just let your money work for you and you can be successful. Yep. If you don't believe me, a simple thing that most people want is to be a millionaire.
Yep.
If you're a 20-year-old and you plan on saving into the traditional 65 years of age, you only have to save $95 a month, assuming what the S&P 500 has been making, since the 50s, which is around 10%. If you're a 25-year-old, you only need to be saving about $158 a month. So when I hear that stat, because I've used that a bunch when we talk about 88 times over, here's what I want people to know. I said $1 million, right? That's what it's going to be worth at retirement at 65. That 20-year-old, their entire investment is $51,000. So where does the other $949,000 come from?
It's from the eighth one of the world, compounding interest.
It is compounding interest. You contribute 5, your money is going to work so hard for you, your army of dollar bills, it's going to contribute the other 95% of the growth for the 20-year-old. For the 25-year-old, they're basically contributing close to $76,000. So you can do the math on that, and you can see very quickly that $920,000 is going to come from your army of dollar bills. So guys, your money, you might not have a lot. I get it. When you're in your 20s, you're like, Brian, I have to have debt because I just need to live.
Yeah.
And well, I don't have any money to save. I'll do that when I'm in my 40s. I'll do that in my 50s because I'll hopefully have enough income. You've blown it because this is the opportunity to let your money be 88 times over, meaning every dollar can turn into $88.
Yeah, and I think that's so powerful, and it's such a common misnomer out there. Somebody thinks about, okay, well, if I have a dollar that I put on a credit card, right? And let's say I have 15% interest and I'm paying on that. I'm only paying 15 cents. That dollar only costs me 15 cents. We would say that that's actually really bad math.
Yeah.
That $1 is actually costing your future self $88.
Yeah.
That's a lot more punitive than a 15% interest rate.
So a lot of you are like, this is supposed to be a debt show. Why are you talking about the growth of my money? We want to show you that rocket fuel. Now let's kind of pivot and talk about where do debt loads need to be and what are the debts that are impacting people in their 20s. The first one, the largest portion of your debt is going to be student loan debt.
No, it's not a huge surprise that 20-year-olds or people in their 20s, that's the biggest one that they face.
28% of debt load for 18 to 24-year-olds is student loan debt. The average for a millennial household is around $14,800. You know, truthfully, when I saw that number, it didn't freak me out.
Well, because you think about most universities probably cost more than 15 grand a year, around 15 grand a year. So it doesn't seem crazy that, 1 year of university costs in debt.
Now, you millennials are getting older, so that stat might also have some 30-something-year-olds
True.
that are getting close to being out of debt. No offense to you millennials. You're like, I'm a Gen Xer, so I know what it feels like to be the not newest kid in town anymore on getting older. But I do think it's interesting because a lot of people, I can imagine students, in that 18 to 23 age range, it's so easy to go get student loan debt and you have nobody, no uncle or parent that is telling you, giving you guidance on this stuff. You're like, well, how much student loan debt is okay? Because I know that it's okay to use debt for good things like houses, which are hopefully appreciating, and for student loans because I'm investing in myself and this is going to allow me to make more money. But how much debt is okay? And this goes into so many decisions when you're choosing your college. Should you go public school? Should you go private school? What major should you take? Here's the guidance that's going to keep you out of trouble. You should not let your student loan debt exceed what you think that first year anticipated income is going to be.
So if you go out there and you think that right out of college, your first year of employment's going to pay $40,000 a year, you probably shouldn't have $140,000 of student loan debt. That's a mismatch. You want to make sure that you keep it below that first year's annual salary.
And I would also, if you're going to choose a career path that's going to pay $40,000 or $50,000, pay attention to where you go to school too, because some of these, I'm always amazed when we do college planning analysis and people show me these private schools that they're going to go to for college. And I say, well, what's the earning potential of the career that you're seeking? I'm like, I don't know if that
justifies the cost.
So pay attention because it's those type of decisions that go into running that debt up.
Yep.
So pay attention to that.
And so what I'm hearing you say is before you even decide to take on student debt or before you encourage your kids to take on student debt, you kind of have to begin with the end in mind.
For sure. It requires some vision planning to know what you expect out of your college experience and then also how to structure that financially if you're going to use something like student loan debt.
Love it.
And then, Bo, you brought up, and I'll let you kind of close it out before we move on to the next thing, was you said not all debt is created equal. What did you mean?
Yeah, one thing you need to be aware of is when you go out there and get student loan debt, I mean, obviously there are different kinds of loans. There are subsidized loans, non-subsidized loans, parent loans, student loans. But what I'm actually talking about is some types of debt, and I'll use my wife as a specific example. When she graduated, she had some student loan debt, and she was a school teacher. She wanted to go be a middle school teacher. Well, her program, one of the loans that her university offered said, hey, if you go teach either math or science, we'll forgive up to X amount of that student loan debt. So there's actually a mechanism where some loans are forgivable depending on the vocation you choose.
The public service debt forgiveness type program.
That's another example. Public service debt forgiveness. There's all kinds of amazing Google research you can go do on that, where if you work in a certain sector for a certain type of entity, you could even potentially have some of your student loan debt disqualified.
I know there's been a lot of stuff in the media about a lot of people didn't qualify for that public sector service for debt forgiveness. I would go, was it White Coat Investor does
Yeah,
a lot
that's
of
right.
research.
Yep.
So if you're one, because there's some of you doctors out there that have done your resident work at a public university hospital, you might have some opportunities. So go check into that. We'll move on because that's a whole nother topic, but we like to throw those little tidbits out there for you.
Yep.
Let's talk about credit cards.
The student loans we were kind on. I feel like we can be less kind on this one.
No, for sure. This is where, and by the end of this, y'all are going to be like, because, I allude to him, but Dave Ramsey is spot on if you, on credit card debt, if you are not a disciplined individual. And unfortunately, the lion's share of Americans are not disciplined with their credit card debt. So when people ask me my opinion, like on Dave's advice on not using credit cards at all, I got to tell you, the results of behavior of the average American shows he's probably closer to right than those of us who talk about discipline use,
right.
Because the average person just has no willpower.
Sense of discipline,
and
yeah.
I want to talk about that because I know when I was in my 20s, I was always scared of debt because my parents had me thinking that you signed up for debt and then back hair was going to start growing or something bad was going to happen to you. It was one of those things that really, it was irrational. And I remember being in college at UGA, at University of Georgia, and
Go
I
Dogs.
kid you not, I think that, I think they have changed the rules specifically because of these behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
I would see a line of kids signing up for credit cards for a bag of 79-cent Lay's potato chips.
Oh yeah, or a free T-shirt.
Or a free T-shirt.
Yep.
And I even remember then having zero to my name, not even having a credit card or understanding that's a failure. That's
Yep.
probably not. And I knew so many friends that ran up $2,000 to $3,000 of credit card debt off of lifestyle.
Sure.
And then they'd have to go work some bad job, beg a relative, or do something to get out of debt. That was just the story that you went on. The thing I would tell you is that among millennial people that are 25 to 34 years of age, credit card balances are their leading source of debt.
And I think even the number is, 25% of their total debt load are on credit card balances. And by the way, I don't know if you recognize this, credit cards don't often have the most advantageous terms where you're paying like 3, 4, 5% interest if you're carrying a balance. It's usually something a little more aggressive than that.
I don't think you should ever have what is called credit card debt.
Mm-hmm.
Debt implies to me that you have a balance.
Yep.
You can have credit card use, but you should never have credit card debt.
I think that is well said. And I think it's a little bit different than some other popular opinion out there.
I mean, if you are not paying your credit card statement off monthly, you're doing it wrong. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, it's one of those things we've talked about that you're all hat, no cattle.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
I've
exactly
used
right.
that in previous shows. And then also, I don't like people who fake lifestyle and consumption just because they know that good things are coming, so they go ahead and try to accelerate those things for their benefit way ahead of schedule.
That's right. One of the things, obviously we record this show live, so if you're out there listening to this not live, we have a live chat going on, and someone actually said this in the live chat, and Brian, we had it in the notes. Anytime you go and secure debt, all you're really doing is borrowing from your future self. You are accelerating
doubt.
consumption from the future into today, and this is what's so sad about
Taking that rocket fuel.
You're borrowing from your wealthier future self and making that person less wealthy.
Yeah. You hear about economic outpatient care. That's where you have adult children who come back to really pull off of your finances. You're doing the same thing with your army of dollar bills when you use credit card debt at a young age. And the thing I always think about is that we just did a show on funny words that impact your finances. And one of them was the hedonic treadmill.
That's right.
And this is what we learned about thinking about that is that the way the human brain processes fulfillment and happiness with money is that you should slowly increase your lifestyle so that you enjoy all steps of the ride.
Right.
Because the research shows that if you go from a 15-year-old, let's just say I had a raggedy Cavalier Chevy car, you know, that was like, I mean, it really was like 15, 16 years old. If I would have gone from that car when I graduated college to, let's just say, like a Mercedes, a Cadillac, some premium brand, I would have felt great. It would have been one of those moments where happiness would have been awesome about getting it. But the research shows Brian going from that car to a Mazda probably wouldn't have been any different.
Yeah.
I skipped a bunch of steps along the treadmill.
Yep.
But my happiness factor would have settled in, because here's the thing, guys. Coming from a guy who reached a level in my career, the human condition has an incredible ability to absorb and consider it normal whatever you're doing in
That's
life.
right.
You have a beautiful big house. 6 months into it, it'll just seem like your house.
Just seem a house. Yep.
I mean,
That's
so be careful of that. The way to really create fulfillment is to move up that lifestyle very slowly, and then you'll truthfully you'll have more money to save and invest
right.
in yourself, which is going to be helpful. So
you said it perfectly, Brian. You said this to start with. Our advice on how you should handle credit card debt in your 20s, and I don't want to do too much of a spoiler alert, this is the same for 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on, is you should pay them off every month. You should not carry a balance on credit cards. It's just really not super justifiable to do that.
credit card debt should not exist in your life. Like I said, credit card use is okay because that's assuming that you're paying it off every month. If you find out that you can't do it, you know, and you're 25 years old and you're not paying that credit card, you really might need to go check into some of Dave Ramsey's books. You know, and his lifestyle is you just don't use credit cards.
That's right.
I'm at least giving you the option if you're responsible, because I think there's people that can do it. But based upon the research, it's a smaller number than unfortunately we'd all like to admit.
So one of the things we want to do, and one of the things that you guys have told us that you like when we do these by the decade shows is, all right, give us a litmus test. How do we know where's the average? Where should we be? Well, where should you be is you should be at zero debt, right? I mean, that's kind of the dream that we all live for. But realistically, in your 20s, we thought it'd be helpful to share what the average debt load of someone in their 20s
This doesn't
is.
mean where you are. We want you to be less than this, but this is the average.
So what we found is that the average debt load for someone from age 18 to 24 is $22,000. Now, one of the things that's interesting about the numbers is
This is personal debt. Remember, it does not include mortgages.
That's exactly right. We purposefully excluded mortgages because we recognize if you're listening to this in
San Francisco
Bay Area, the cost of living, cost of home ownership, cost of residence is very different than if you're listening to it in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Is Sheboygan in Wisconsin?
I mean, I was just going to say, like somewhere, like I have relatives in, you know, North Carolina, South Carolina, and places like that. And, you know, so if we told you the average mortgage was like $135,000 and you're out in San Francisco, you'd be like, get out of here.
That's right.
I mean, so it's not even worth including that data.
So what we're talking about is non-mortgage personal debt. So credit cards, student loans, auto loans. So the average from age 18 to 24, so this is the early 20s, is $22,000. Average from age 25 to 34 is $42,000.
That's a good point. So let's move on to the 30s. Whew. Now, here's the thing about the 30s. You start hitting some traction in your financial life. So if you're having positive things happening in your financial life, why would you hit the self-destruct button by getting too much debt? And we see this. I hate it when people start getting success and then they totally derail themselves. They might have done everything right in the 20s, but then all of a sudden they just like, you know what? I owe this to myself. Right. And I'm looking at you doctors hard because I get it. You guys all through your 20s, you're in school. You're not making any money. You're studying all the time. All your buddies graduated from the business school at 23. And you're like, you know what? When I get out of school, I deserve to have that fancy car. It's time. But that might not be what's going on. Yes, because you're having some success. Yes, you're probably at the point you have a family, potentially, starting to growing a family. You're also at that point where you're thinking, I need a house.
That's right.
You know, this is the point where you probably are, because of your income and where you are and your age, that the banks aren't going to laugh at you when you try to go get a mortgage. So how do we make sure that you're not blowing this all up?
And I think statistically, Brian, you actually showed me this chart. And you know, we should have used this chart. But it talks about, when we talk about what your income does over the trajectory of a career versus what your expenses do over the trajectory of a career, what we found is the decade of the 30s is actually the largest mismatch. It's the hardest time to match those two.
Let's pull it up. I mean, I have no problem sharing this data. I mean, this is your debt over a lifetime, essentially. And you notice this is the research of what the average debt is per age. And it's exactly what Bo said. You know, when you're in your 30s, you can see, especially your mid-30s, you've bought the farm. I mean, literally, you can see this is where you're getting into some peak. That period between 35 to 45 is peak debt time, and that makes sense because you're probably buying houses and other things. But as you can see, over the career, you're hoping that your debt load decreases as you get older. Yep. So that is the plan, and that's what we consider success, is if you can, make that debt go away over time, and it's going to set you up for much better success. So let's kind of talk about these debt levels and the different holes that you have to avoid. And the first one is credit card debt. Now, credit card debt, once again, for 25 to 34-year-olds, so this is getting to the younger side of the 30s, their leading debt is still the credit card, which is surprising because, as I mentioned in the 20s, and I'm saying this for the benefit of the highlight videos too, is that you should never, absolutely never have credit card debt. You can have credit card use, but debt implies that you're actually using and carrying a balance. That's not good. You got to pay these things off on a month-to-month basis, because if you don't pay your credit card debt off monthly, that whole thing about compounding interest is not working for you. It's working for Mr. Visa and Mrs. MasterCard.
That's right.
It really is. I mean, when they're paying double-digit, I talk about all the time, 88 times over. And I use an assumption that's a pretty aggressive assumption because I use the S&P 500. I use for 20-year-olds, I use like 10%.
Right.
And people will write and say, that's a really aggressive assumption. I'm like, well, what about the credit card company that's giving you an average credit card rate of over 15%?
Yeah.
No, that is a really aggressive number.
Right.
So don't be on the negative side of that. I think paying off, you need to look at credit card debt as a binary decision. Mm-hmm. Remember, binary means, if you think about computers and what they're doing, they're basically turning circuits on and off. You have 0 and then you have 1. 0 with credit cards means you can't pay it off, so you need to have a 0 balance. Yep. 1 means that you're responsible, you pay it off every month. You can responsibly, very conservatively, and cautiously use credit card debt.
Now, in my opinion, I think the 30s is probably when keeping up with the Joneses first starts to happen, and maybe is where it first gets the most aggressive. And unfortunately, one of the easiest ways to keep up with the Joneses is to go finance your life. Yeah. Is to buy the car, or put the furniture. You can afford
anything for $400 a month.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
You can get a jet ski, you can get a car, you can get a trailer, you can get an RV. It's all for $400, because all they have to do is keep pushing that amortization out 6-7 years. You can afford anything for $400. Problem is, those $400 keep stacking up.
Yeah. So binarily, if you can't control your behavior there, it might make sense for you not to use credit cards at all if you're in your 30s.
So let's talk about mortgages. This is a big one. Now, it does have some positive connotations. Mm-hmm. I mean, I want to give some stats here. And Bo, you asked me to clarify this when you were looking at the show notes. From people looking outside in, meaning that people who do not own a house, if you ask them, is owning a house part of the American dream? 75% of people who don't even own a house will say,
that's part of the American dream.
Own a house. Yeah. And then here's what's something that's kind of affirming of this dream of American home ownership. 90% of people who do own houses confirm that they think that it's part of the American dream. So obviously a house is going to be a big part of you feeling like you're living your best life and growing this thing. But that leads to mortgage debt, because most people can't pay for a house at 100%. So a healthy thing is to hopefully put down 20%. But how do we make sure that this American dream doesn't turn into a complete nightmare?
Because here's what I think is really interesting, Brian. We have an audience that's pretty diverse. They're all over the world. They're also range from some of those that are a little longer in the tooth to even some that are possibly so short in the tooth, they might not have actually been in the working world a decade ago.
Yeah.
They might not have actually seen how dangerous a mortgage crisis can actually be. They might not have actually lived through that. And it's funny how quickly we forget our own history.
Yeah.
Because if you remember back post 2008, 2009, 2010, it was really hard to go get financing. It was really hard to go get a loan. It was really easy immediately before that, but right after it's really hard. Have you noticed it's starting to get a little bit easier again?
Oh, for sure.
It's a little bit easier to go out there and get financing, get qualified for maybe bigger mortgages than you thought you might have been able to get qualified for.
So, and I think because it is getting easier, it's not as easy as it was in 2006 and 7, but it's definitely getting easier. Some more relaxed lending standards are kind of kicking in with banks as they feel more confident. So people are probably saying, well, how do I handle this? I mean, and I always tell people the best way to be successful with mortgage debt is to set up some boundaries. You got to have boundaries and be disciplined with how much you're spending on housing. And I go with a number because you see people all the time. There's that stat that you're not supposed to let mortgages be greater than 28% of your gross income. I disagree with that. I'd actually prefer for you to be more conservative because I don't want you to be house rich, life poor. Because there's a lot of people that will go get this beautiful house, not be able to afford to put furniture in it, not be able to afford to take your family out to eat, not to be able to afford to take your family on vacations, because all you can afford to pay is this big mortgage. So to avoid that, we found putting up these guardrails or boundaries will really protect you. And so we use a stat of 25% of your gross income. But here's what this is pretty much all-inclusive house ownership, because I want you to include your mortgage, your taxes, your insurance, as well as your utilities. I think a lot of people would probably say, well, my utilities are part of my annual household expenses. Yeah, that's true. But let's go ahead and put it in that 25% figure to keep yourself honest and also to set up those very safe boundaries so you don't get ahead of yourself. Here's something. This is a pivot. I think a lot of people, and this is because I've given a lot of praise to our neighbor on paying off your credit cards. There is one little thing that I want to talk to you guys about that gives me pause when people tell you to pay off all your debt in your 30s, is that you guys heard me talk about exponential growth. What does it take for your money to grow? It concerns me when I hear 30-year-olds paying off debt way too soon when they're not saving 15 to 20% of their money towards long-term financial independence.
And I feel like we see this a lot inside of the FIRE movement, the financial independent retire early movement.
Just want to get all debt paid off.
They want to get all the debt paid off as early as possible.
So here's the teachable moment. I was always trying to come up with analogies or examples of things you ought to think about for yourself to get your headspace right. Would you have rather, let's just say Apple or Google came to you with two options. They said, Bo, we're going to give you an IPO option on us. Would you have rather, now you realize you have the knowledge to know Apple and Google turned out pretty good in the long term.
All right.
So would you rather look back and say, I'd rather have IPO shares, meaning I bought into the equity of Apple or Google, or would you have rather lent, because they needed money in the beginning stages, would you rather lend money to Apple or Google and pay them 4.5 and get paid 4.5%?
So would I rather be an owner in the equity of the company, or would I rather guarantee myself just a 4% debt repayment?
Instead, even easier, would you like to have the exponential upside growth of Apple and Google looking back on how well they've done historically, or would you rather get a very conservative 4.5%? And I know that sounds like an extreme example, but what I just explained is you. Because what is your mortgage company typically charging on mortgages right now? It's around 4 to 4.5%.
Yep.
So that's what you're paying for the capital. Meanwhile, a 30-year-old who wants to be a millionaire and only needs to make around 9% a year, I brought it down, needs to save about $340 a month.
Which seems very reasonable.
That's only a 14% contribution towards the $1 million, meaning that over a lifetime they will have invested $143,000, but it turns into $1 million.
Yep.
So you can quickly see there's exponential growth there. I mean, 86% of your $1 million is coming from that explosive growth of compounding interest, or you could just get 4.5%, because that's what happens when you put your money, you pay down that mortgage so soon, that money gets locked into, your army of dollar bills gets locked into and platooned inside your house equity.
Yeah, all you're doing is guaranteeing yourself that next $1 times your mortgage interest rate. And actually, it's even a little bit less than that because there's a tax incentive, right?
Yeah.
So the rate of return is actually even a little bit lower if you want to get super nerdy about it.
And look, a lot of you guys are like, wait a minute. So he's one of these guys that wants me to use a lot of leverage and mortgage debt. No, that's why we put the 25% boundary in there. And then you guys who are going to come back and go, listen, I encourage my 30-year-olds, go listen to our show on 40s. Stay with us on the 50s. And you're going to see, we actually want you to be debt-free by the time you reach financial independence. I just don't want you to be like the fifth Beatle, where you are making such a bad decision where it feels so good in the short term to be paying down this debt, but you fast forward 20, 30 years in the future and you look back at yourself and go, why did I do that? I could have averaged 8 or 9% a year. Instead, I locked in that I paid down debt that was at historic lows.
Now, if you're someone, and we didn't talk about this, so I'm going to go off the beaten path here. If you're someone who just has no self-control, which you're probably not because you're listening to the Money Guy show, so you probably have some pretty good instincts. If your two options are go out and spend the money or prepay the debt, well then go ahead, get yourself out of debt. But if you have the wherewithal to actually let that rocket fuel burn hot, let that money go to work for you.
Put that money to pay yourself first. Create that cash management plan where 15 to 25% of your money is going to work for you. So that's a no-brainer in my eyes, especially in your 20s and 30s. So let's talk about auto loans, because this is going to be another one where lifestyle creep is going to just, you get into your 30s, you start making a few bucks, and you're like, I am owed this car. And then I'm not even, let's take out the ego. Let's just go ahead and push the pride and ego aside. There's a few of you that might have a growing family. And you're like, look, I've got kids now. I need them to be in something safe.
That's right.
I need to make it where when we go visit relatives, I can actually load that bouncer, I can load that stroller, and so I might need something bigger. The old Volkswagen Golf or is not
just not going to get it
anymore.
done.
I'm going to need an SUV. We all hit those points, and that's healthy that life has progressed. So how do you do it in a good way so that you don't turn this into a bad decision? And here's the thing, Bo, just setting this up. We have a whole office full of financially minded people.
That's right.
What's funny is we even have administrators who are CPAs. I mean, because we have brought back people who stayed at home with their family and then they came back. So brilliant minds here at Abound Wealth.
That's right. At Abound Wealth, we have CPA admins. Just think about that for a second.
I mean, we're working on changing that though. but I just want to talk to you that we have some very healthy discussions here in the office. And this one, it was a big one, because here's my advice to you guys is that I think long and hard about what I tell you. I think about, could I walk the walk that I'm giving you advice on? Because I think it is so many financial people out there, we'll say guru, we'll use the rabbit ears, where they give you hard and fast advice, but I'm like, do they really follow that advice? Is that practical?
Right.
Is that tied? Is that tied to reality, or is that just something that sounds good and it makes a great little bold face thing on Twitter? So we had so much discussion on what is a healthy way to handle car debt, because we realized that you guys in your 30s that have a growing family, I'm taking the pride in those things. You just want a basic, good transportation that's safe. You might be in that situation, but don't have enough cash to pay for a car completely.
That's right.
So what do you do? I mean, what do we do? And the first thing I tell you, everything I'm about to talk about is a non-premium brand.
Okay.
So don't hear me and think, well, that must apply to Mercedes, BMW, Tesla, Audi. No, Lexus, I don't consider, no, you can't use what I'm about to tell you for any premium brand. This is just me trying to give you guidance as like your favorite financial uncle that's going to keep you out of the ditches and out of trouble, but also recognizes that you got to do this for the family.
Old Uncle Money Guy.
So we came up with the 20/3/8 rules.
23/8.
This 23/8 is your friend. And this is, let me walk you through each of these. We think when you're making an auto decision for a non-premium brand, you need to put down at least 20%.
Okay.
That one probably doesn't raise too many eyebrows.
Yeah, so if you're thinking about a new-ish SUV or a new-ish minivan, maybe you said growing family, you're probably talking about something from like $35,000-$40,000, right? In that realm.
That breaks my heart just hearing that. So
I mean, that's
like $7,000 to $8,000.
Yeah, that's right.
On that much money. And you couldn't go cheaper than that, by the way. You could do close to let's say 30. So you could talk on a $30,000 car, you're talking about $6,000 bucks.
Right.
So that one I don't think raises eyebrows, because people are like, yeah, I want to have some equity, so I'm going to put down 20%. This next one is going to be the one that raises the eyebrows, and I'm doing it on purpose. That 3 and that 23/8 number is, I want you to look at what you think you can afford, and I want you to amortize it by on a 3-year basis, a 36-month basis.
So if you're going to borrow money to pay for this car, you need to plan on having it paid off inside of 36
Now,
months.
look, I'm willing to say, because a lot of times these auto companies will give you 48 months, 60 months, and they'll give you a great premium, low interest rate. I'm not saying you have to pay it off in 36 months, but I at least want you to run a 36-month amortization. With that being the goal, you can go do the 48-month financing to give yourself some flexibility, but I'm hoping as you get bonuses, as you get some extra money that comes in at parts of the year, that you are going to try to get out of this debt within 36 months.
Years.
I mean, that's why I know that's going to raise some eyebrows, but I think that's going to keep you from a shock and awe moment of looking at a 36-month amortization is going to keep you from going and buying too much car.
All right, so 20% down is how much we put down on it. And then we're going to do it over 3 years, but there's another number. What's the 8?
The 8 is that your car payments should not exceed 8% of your gross income.
So I take whatever I make on a monthly basis, I multiply that times 0.08, and my automobile expense should not cross over that amount.
Now, you said it right. It's not your loan. It's the actual automobile expense, which includes the principal and interest from the loan, but also your auto insurance.
Yep.
And for you guys, this will also keep you honest from buying a sports car or other things, because it's going to directly dip into that pot of how much you could finance if your insurance rates are pretty high.
So let's do our little spot check litmus test. So we already said that for older millennials, that's ages 25 to 34, the average debt load, non-mortgage, is $42,000. For Gen Xers, so this is from age 35 out to 49, average debt load is actually $39,000 of personal debt.
What I liked about that, you saw the numbers start going down.
It did start coming down.
It goes back to that chart where we showed you it's a narrative of life. Sure. It's understandable that when you're in your 30s, you're probably taking down that mortgage, you still got some student loan debt. That stuff is going to start mitigating and going down, though, as you hit some age and get it underneath you. So let's pivot. Let's talk about what I resemble. Ooh, that wounded warrior phase of the 40s. Why do I say wounded warrior phase? Is because you realize when you get to be my age, you get sentimental about things, but you also realize you're probably not conquering the world like you thought you would at your 20s and 30s. Okay. So it goes hand in hand with the being sentimental, but it also, I think, gives you some superpowers and the fact that you can be realistic on where you are in your life. It's that moment of truth. You're now at the point where you can look at your actions of the past. If you started saving in your 20s, if you started saving in your early 30s, it's probably a moment of celebration. You're probably thinking, hey, I can take my foot off the accelerator a little bit because I made a lot of sacrifices when I was in my 20s and 30s. For you guys that you had a good time in your 20s, you had a good time in your 30s, but you've woken up and you're like, wow, I lived longer than I thought I would, and I'm here. You have to actually hit the accelerator because now you're on the opposite side of deferred gratification, where you're realizing that you're probably 20 to 25 years from retirement. So man, oh man, do we need to make up some time.
Gotta get busy.
And let me give you some case in points. There's actually a research piece. We read a lot of stuff, but we have to be really nerdy to stay ahead of the Money Guy family. And there was a research piece that said for two people to end up in the same retirement at 65, the person who just starts saving at 45 years of age has to save 27% of their gross income.
Now, if you've listened to The Money Guy for any amount of time at all, we always tell people your goal for saving should be 15 to 20%, but really we like that 20% number. If you put it off and wait until 45, you can't do 20% anymore. You got to go all the way up to 27%.
Meanwhile, your friend who started saving at 25 years of age, they only have to save 10% of their income to have the exact same retirement. That's how the stats work on compounding interest and starting early. So now all of you guys that are in your 40s and you're a little nervous, I want you to use this as your motivation to say, I'm no longer on a marathon towards retirement, because when you're on a marathon, you can choose a nice pace, because you have a long time ahead of you. So you go at a pace that you just feel comfortable. You're past that point, my 40-year-olds. If you are behind, you're on a full-on sprint now. We've got 20 years to get you healthy, so you got to run wide open. We're talking about hit this thing hard and get excited about it.
I just got a visual of Brian Preston in his 40s in a dead-on sprint.
The only problem with that, I could do it. I'd probably pull something in this
Just stretch for like an hour and a half.
I had visions of
beforehand.
us playing church softball that time, and I remember the one time I hit a ball really good, and I had to go around first, and I was headed to second. I felt like I was hitting it instead of hitting the clutch and hitting that gear. All of a sudden, something gave in my leg, and I was like, I don't know that I got that gear. So it's just. So I'm glad you get a visual, but it's one of those things. So let's kind of talk about these debts. For all of our, hopefully for those that are still taking the marathon pace and those that are hitting the accelerator because they got to do some catch up and they're sprinting. Let's talk about the number one source of debt for these 40-year-olds. That's mortgages.
Yep.
I still stand by, and I talked about this for my 30-year-olds. It's the same for our 40-year-olds. You do not want your debt for your house exceeding 25% of your income. And when I say housing expenses, we're talking about principal and interest, we're talking about insurance, we're talking about taxes, and I do this conservative thing of even including your utilities.
I think this is so interesting, Brian. Can you pull up the illustration again, the chart on the screen? I just think it's so interesting. When you look at this, the mortgage or the home equity line, the primary residence, that dark blue at the very bottom of the screen, it actually increases from less than 35. Look at what happens in the 40s. Mortgage debt actually increases in the 40s. And I would argue that if you are that person who's supposed to be moving in the right direction, you'd kind of like that to see that start coming down. But what ends up happening is this is kind of that time where we do upgrade. We move into that second home. We buy that dream home. And that's okay, but just recognize rather than your mountain going down, your mountain actually starts going up again. So you want to make sure you understand that that's happening.
I think you have to definitely pay attention to where you are because you do want that lifestyle creep, because I get it. You get kids, so you're like, the kids are home. I want to make sure that we have everybody in a comfortable thing. So you do that upgrade. Just make sure that you do this in a smart way so that when they're out of the house, you're not regretting some of those decisions that you made.
Yep.
Let's talk about this. I thought this was interesting because I've told you, and this is something that I want to mention because I didn't say it for my 30-year-olds because 30 is kind of when mortgages start showing up on the scene. I think for 30-year-olds, they should do a 30-year mortgage if you're looking at the tool of using mortgages, but plan on paying them off over the 25 to 30-year period. There's a difference for my 40-year-olds.
You did not say paying it off in a 10 to 15-year period.
No,
you
because
said
I told you
25 to 30
the concern I have with debt when you pay it off too early is the sacrifice you have on the compounding interest of your growing assets yourself. For my 40-year-olds, your people, all of you guys that are in your 40s, you resemble me. You're starting to understand your mortality. You understand that, man, I'm very happy, but this thing, we got to know our limits. I want you to understand you need to be out of debt by your I like people to be out of debt in their mid 50s by at least retirement. So maybe you have I have no problem with people doing 30-year mortgages, but this probably is the stage of your life that you're going to try to pay it off in like a 15-year period. Use that flexibility of doing the 30-year loan so you have months that are tight, you don't feel pinched by the cash flow, but maybe you want to pay it off a little sooner.
So you said something interesting right there, Brian. You said that your goal or kind of what you think about in terms of advising people is that sort of in your mid-50s is when you want to think about being debt-free. Now, we've talked a lot about one financial voice out there, Dave Ramsey. That's actually a little counter to another financial voice out there that we're all pretty familiar with, right?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. This CNBC article that we were pulling some of the stats from, somebody I'm a big fan of, Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary from the Shark Tank. Did I put a the there for no reason? It's Shark Tank. It's not the Shark Tank, right? I pulled an old man the.
Is it? Well, you go to the Kroger and log on to the Facebook.
No, I think it's just Shark Tank.
And then watch the Shark
just
Tank.
Like you do the Facebook, the Twitter. When you get old enough, you just start putting random these there. But Shark Tank, and Kevin O'Leary was actually interviewed for this piece. And I was like, man, this is a perfect example of taking somebody who's super successful, who I think a lot of, but you have to pay attention to the data that celebrity gurus give you because they might just be wrong. And I see this because I read just an article recently that was totally talking about how many people pick on Susie Orman, so many people pick on Dave Ramsey, and I'll throw in Kevin O'Leary with this piece, but in the grand scheme of it, they really are doing a lot more good
That's right.
than the things you're nitpicking them on.
Absolutely.
So even though I'm throwing Kevin on this nitpick, it's more of just because I want it to be an educational thing. I actually love how Shark Tank pushes entrepreneurial type thought. But here's what Kevin O'Leary said for this piece. I'm just going to read the quote. He said, people should aim to have all of their debt paid off, from mortgages to student loans to credit card debt, by age 45. The reason I say 45 is the turning point, or in your 40s, is because think about a career. Most careers start in early 20s and end in the mid 60s. So when you're 45 years old, the game is more than half over, and you better be out of debt because, and this is the key part, this is the part I want you to pay attention to, because you're going to use the rest of the innings in that game to accrue capital. Okay, so what Kevin said is pay off that debt in your 40s so that you can use the rest of your working career to just building up assets that capital.
Right.
That sounds good. That is a great soundbite. I understand why CNBC put it in here, but I want to give you a counterpoint. I think Kevin
The
is
money
off.
guy flavor.
The money guy flavor is Kevin's off by 10 years. Because listen to these stats. This is the data. I'm saying look behind the curtain, actually look at the data. Remember the compound or multiplier effect of money by age. For a 20-year-old, they can make 10%, meaning they can be aggressive, invest in something like the S&P. $1 turns into $88 at retirement if they're letting it work. A 30-year-old who's making 9% a year, we brought it down a little bit, a little more conservative, still aggressive. $1 has the opportunity to turn into $23.
Right.
A 40-year-old who's making 8%, $1 has the opportunity of turning into $7.
So if we pause there for a second, that's still pretty good. I mean,
Still
$1
good.
turning
It's a
7 times
multiplier
over.
effect.
Absolutely.
But it's not a 20-year-old anymore.
No,
You're not
right.
88 times over. You're now at 7. And then a 50-year-old, $1 at 7%, by the way, $1 has potential of turning into $3 by the time you retire. Did you see how drastic that curve drove down? The reason I think Kevin is off by a decade is that in order to be completely debt-free by the time you're 45, you have to be paying down a lot of debt in your 20s and your 30s and even the early parts of your 40s to be completely debt-free. Those are years that capital could have a huge multiplier effect. Now, when you hear once you cross 50, there's still a multiplier effect, but that $1 has the potential to turn into 3. There's a big difference between turning 1 into 3 versus 1 into $88 like a 20-year-old has. I think Kevin's backwards on that. I'd rather you focus on building that capital while you're younger, and then when you cross over that 50 mark, reevaluate where you are on that mortgage debt to try to get rid of it in that decade.
Yeah, so it's Mr. Wonderful said that the dollars that are most valuable are those ones in the late innings, 45 to 65. We're kind of saying the opposite. The dollars that are the most valuable are those in the early innings.
Yeah, that's the multiplier. That's the part where you, like I said, I'm hoping that people that do it right, you get it to my age, where you get to your mid to late 40s, you're like, I'm going to keep saving because I just love it. I'm addicted and I have this saving habit. But truthfully, my army of dollar bills has kind of gotten to the point, it's carrying a lot of the weight for me. We talk about net worth statements. One of my favorite games with net worth statement is seeing if the growth in my net worth exceeds my income from last year, because that means the army of dollar bills is doing
It's working just as hard as you are.
It is crushing it, because we all know you have to live off that money you're making too. So if your net worth goes up more than your income, that means that not only did you consume and live all those assets, but they were replenished by your capital working for you.
That's right.
So it's very powerful stuff. Let's move on to credit cards.
We've said this 1,000 times. Don't have credit card debt paid off monthly. It holds true in 40s. It was true in 20s. It's true in 30s. It's still true in the 40s.
I'll repeat it because I know the human brain takes 3 or 4 times before it actually absorbs something. I never, ever want you to have credit card debt. I'm okay with you having credit card use, but debt implies that you're carrying a balance, and that credit card has to be paid off monthly. Let's talk about auto loans. I spent a lot of time for the people who are watching a highlight clip for my people in the 30s on talking about how you afford and finance a car in your 30s for a basic brand. And I still stand by the 23-8 rule, which means you're going to put down 20% for the car. You're going to run an amortization on paying that car off within 3 years, and then you're not going to let the debt exceed 8% of your gross income, your monthly payments, I should say. And that includes insurance on that car as well.
Yep.
It's not just the loan, it's also the insurance. So that's basic. But what about premium brands? Because probably a lot of you guys, when you're getting your 40s, you're starting to have some success. You're like me. I mean, I'm not a hypocrite. I mean, I now have a Tesla.
Yep.
My wife has an Audi.
Yep.
So you're like, well, Brian, you have nice cars. Is that what, I mean, does that mean you didn't live the life? You're not you're sacrificing your savings. You're doing something. No. Here's how you can afford and justify premium brands is that you have to treat them 12 months, same as cash. I'm going to be a nice guy and tell you have 12 months because I know some of you have bonuses or you have RSUs, you have stock options that might be coming due, but the car, the old 10-year-old, 12-year-old car like my car was, gets to the point where you got to move in a different direction. So it's okay if you treat it 12 months, same as cash.
Yep.
But it has to be paid for within that first 12-month period. If you cannot pay the car off within 12 months, I think you're faking success, and you probably should go back down to that tier of brands that don't have such a high premium built onto them.
That's exactly right. And so for our litmus test, we kind of already mentioned this. If you're in that Generation X phase, that age 35 to 49, the average amount of non-mortgage personal debt for an American in this country is $39,000.
Let's talk about 50-year-olds.
All right.
Guys, this is a short section, so the highlight video on this one's going to be really short because guess what? Debt, I'm going to go ahead and pull the chart up again, Bo, just so we can pull it up. Look at that chart. I mean, you can see your peak earning years. If we look at the narrative of life, when you're a younger person, you have student loan debt, and then as you get into your 30s, you start picking up the mortgage debt, and it goes. But then this magical thing happens around 45 as you hit your peak, and then you start dropping off.
That's right.
I'm telling you guys, by the time you're in your 50s, you really want to start getting things paid off.
That's right.
And here's something I want to draw attention to because I'm going to use another chart that I think is great. This is the entire population. If you notice, this is from Money's website. This is average debt per age by entire population. You notice it's dropping off. It's going down over life. Look at what happens to people who just never pay off the debt.
Because we already said, starting from about 28% of Americans are debt-free, have no debt at all, right? So this is the...
And I got to believe a lot of them are older
That's
Americans, meaning Americans probably in their 50s and older.
Yep.
Look at what happens. This is people who have debt only. So all of your good decision makers who are debts falling off in their 50s are no longer part of the stat. Look at the borrowers. They just never get out of debt. I think everybody who's 55 and over, look, the debt just somehow stays flat.
Yep.
I do not want you to resemble this stat. You need to be thinking more in a healthy way of how debt should be decreasing.
That's exactly right.
So let's kind of talk about this as we're going through it. The big part as we go through mortgages. You should be setting yourself up that hopefully by the time you are what you consider financially independent or at retirement age, you owe no debt.
Including the mortgage.
Including the mortgage. Because you don't really have a retirement or financial independence unless you have an unencumbered life.
Now, we already know we're going to get some emails because we do every time we say this. So folks say, guys, interest rates are so low. There's no way I'm going to pay off my mortgage. I can invest that money, yada, yada, yada. That's fine. If you don't pay off your mortgage, you need to at least have the ability to pay off the mortgage. So by the time you get to financial independence, you either need to be debt-free or you could write a check to be debt-free.
I know who you're giving a nod and a wink towards one of our clients because we've had that discussion, and I understand the analytics. I think this goes beyond analytics because you can win the game and you're just trying to take off when you have reached the point of financial success. You're also trying to create tools to make sure you don't run this thing in the ditch. And leverage in debt is one of those things.
That's right.
We saw it in 2008. We saw it in 2009. Real estate really struggled. I'm one of those people that I plan on being debt-free in my early 50s.
Sure.
I know that I'm leaving money on the table, opportunity costs, the analytics show I should never pay off this mortgage. I don't care. I want to be debt-free. So I'm going to go against Michael.
Okay.
That way I put his name out there. He's going to write us an email.
Michael, I tried. I did what I could. I tried.
Credit cards, it's a binary decision. You've heard us talk about it in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. It didn't change. You should never, ever have credit card debt. You can have credit card use. If you find that you're one of these people that cannot pay your credit card off every month, you just don't need to use them.
Yep.
I'm only giving you permission to use credit cards if you pay them off every month.
I'm even going to throw this out there. In your 20s, maybe you use credit cards bad, you can change your behavior. In your 30s, maybe you use credit cards bad, you can change your behavior. In your 40s, your behavior is kind of set. In your 50s, if you haven't got credit cards figured out yet, get rid of them.
Yeah.
Clearly, you can't handle them.
it.
It's not the knife you need to be using.
Auto loans, go back and look. If you're watching a highlight video, go back and look at the 30s if you're looking at basic cards for financing. 40s, we talk about premium. But I'm going to go a step further. I think by the time you're in your 50s, I don't care if you're buying a non-luxury brand or if you are buying a premium/luxury brand, you just ought to pay cash.
Yep.
By the time you're in your 50s, pay cash. So if
perfect.
you can't afford to pay cash, you're probably faking success or faking your lifestyle a little bit.
And then the last little stat, how do our baby boomers, our folks over 50 stack up? The average debt level for baby boomers, those 50 and over, is $36,000. And we hope it is $36,000 rapidly on its way to zero by the time you get to retirement.
No kidding. So I felt like this was a sprint. Look, debt is one of those things that it seems so easy to get here in America, but it really is one of the sharpest tools in your financial life that can cut you and hurt you if you're not careful with it. So be very respectful. If you're not scared of it, you're not using it right. Pay attention to debt. And I think you're going to find that if you will follow these rules that we talked about on the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s, you're going to come out better for it. And you're going to build that army of dollar bills and have the success that you'd always dreamed of. And a lot of you guys are probably watching this and going, wow, they just rolled out auto debt, credit card debt, mortgage debt, student loan debt, and they gave me guidance free of charge and all this. What in the world is going on here? We call this the abundance cycle, guys. We love on you. We give you tons of free advice, all for the thought that hopefully you're going to reach so much success that you're going to get to a point you say, man, I'd love to have somebody look over my shoulder, give me a second opinion, as well as this whole enterprise. I am the CEO of something that's so valuable. I'm just worried I'm going to screw it up. That's when we want you to reach out to Abound Wealth, the Money Guy team, and we're going to see if we can help you out on just making sure, giving you that financial checkup to look at and go beyond common sense. That's how this whole abundance cycle works.
And did you hear the part where we said that even our admins have their CPA? I mean, we kind of live and breathe this stuff. I'd argue we have the best team in the entire world. Would you agree with that?
You have to be pretty nerdy to work here. So, you understand the personalities that are involved. And then the other thing I didn't mention at the beginning, go to moneyguy.com. I want you to go on there. Give us your email address, your zip code, so we know if we know we have enough Money Guy family in a certain area. Don't be surprised in the next 18 months if we don't start dropping into your neck of the woods to visit some of the Money Guy family. So it's important that you go out there, give us your email address. And then, guys, you probably noticed right behind us, we have a ticker that's telling you how many YouTube subscribers we have. So go to youtube.com, subscribe, and then go ahead and hit the bell. Ding the bell, because you're a winner. And that way you'll also get all the notifications that tell you when Money Guys come out with new content. And then I feel bad because I just had a conversation with a great guy who's been listening for years. He's a podcast guy. I give all his attention to YouTube. We know there's still a lot of you out there listening to the audio of this. You're working out, you're cutting the grass, you're exercising, you're commuting. I want you guys, thank you. We've been doing this since 2006. You're like my oldest child that's been so successful that I just know you're doing it well. So I want to make sure I tell the podcast family, thank you for listening. I'm your host, Brian Preston. Mr. Bo Hansen joins me. Keep coming in and tune into these live shows that we do every other Tuesday. You got to come check out the live shows so you can hear what's going on behind the scenes. You can hear if Bo's wearing pants under the desk, as well as figure out how you can get a tumbler. Did I cover it all?
You nailed it.
Guys, we'll talk to you soon. Brian out.